September 16th, 1992, a Wednesday morning in London. The sun rose over the Thames, as it always had. Bankers filled their offices. Traders stared at screens. The British pound traded as usual on the foreign exchange markets. But beneath the surface, something enormous was happening. A single man, seated in a Manhattan office, was quietly dismantling the currency of one of the world's oldest financial powers. His name was George Soros, and by the end of that day, he would walk away with more than $1 billion in profit, having forced the United Kingdom to abandon its monetary policy in humiliation. This is not a story about clever tricks or secret formulas. This is a story about how nations convince themselves of certainties that do not exist, about how governments bet against reality, and about how one trader recognized the illusion before everyone else did. To understand what happened that September, we must first travel back 2 years earlier, to a moment when Europe believed it was building something grand. In 1990, the nations of Europe were drawing closer together. The Cold War had just ended. The Berlin Wall had fallen. There was optimism in the air, a sense that old rivalries could be replaced with cooperation and shared prosperity. Central to this vision was the European exchange rate mechanism, known as the ERM. It was a system designed to stabilize currencies across Europe. Each country agreed to keep its currency within a narrow band relative to the German Deutsche Mark. If a currency drifted too far, the central bank would intervene, buying or selling to restore balance. The idea was elegant. By locking currencies together, Europe could reduce uncertainty, encourage trade, and prepare for a future single currency. Britain joined the ERM in October 1990, fixing the pound at a rate of 2.95 Deutsche Marks. At the time, it seemed like a safe decision. The British economy was stable. Inflation was under control. There was no reason to think the peg could not hold. But beneath that confidence lay a dangerous assumption. The assumption was that the government could control the value of its own currency simply by declaring it so. Trading in currencies is older than most people realize. For centuries, merchants and bankers exchanged money across borders, always searching for advantage. But in the modern era, currency trading became something else entirely. By the 1990s, the foreign exchange market had grown into the largest financial market on earth. Trillions of dollars moved every day, flowing between banks, corporations, hedge funds, and speculators. These traders were not passive. They did not simply accept the prices governments announced. They formed their own opinions. They analyzed economies, interest rates, inflation, political stability, and when they sensed weakness, they acted. George Soros understood this better than almost anyone. Born in Hungary in 1930, Soros had survived the Nazi occupation as a teenager. After the war, he moved to England, studying philosophy at the London School of Economics. He was shaped by the ideas of Karl Popper, particularly the concept of fallibility, the notion that all human systems are imperfect and vulnerable to collapse. In 1970, Soros founded his own hedge fund, which would eventually become the Quantum Fund. He built a reputation as a macro trader, someone who bet on large-scale economic and political trends. He did not trade individual stocks or bonds. He traded entire economies, and by 1992, his attention had turned to Britain. The British government faced a dilemma. Germany, the anchor of the ERM, had recently reunified. The costs were staggering. To control inflation, the German central bank raised interest rates sharply. This created a problem for Britain. To keep the pound pegged to the Deutsche Mark, Britain had to raise its own interest rates as well. But the British economy was fragile. Unemployment was rising. A recession was taking hold. High interest rates would only make things worse. The government was trapped between two incompatible goals. It wanted to stay in the ERM to prove Britain's commitment to Europe. But it also needed to protect its own economy. Soros saw the contradiction. He believed the British government would eventually be forced to choose, and when it did, it would choose its own economy over a currency peg. In the language of trading, the pound was overvalued. The market price did not reflect reality, and Soros intended to profit from the correction. Throughout the summer of 1992, Soros and his team at Quantum began building a massive position against the pound. They borrowed billions of pounds and immediately sold them, converting the proceeds into Deutsche Marks and other currencies. This is known as shorting. The bet was simple. If the pound fell in value, they could buy it back at a lower price, return what they borrowed, and pocket the difference. But Soros was not the only one. Other hedge funds, banks, and traders around the world were reaching the same conclusion. The pound was vulnerable. The government could not defend it forever. A quiet consensus was forming. And yet, in public, British officials projected confidence. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Norman Lamont, insisted that Britain would remain in the ERM. Prime Minister John Major declared that exiting would be a betrayal of Britain's future. The Treasury spent billions buying pounds, trying to prop up the currency. But it was not enough. Every time the government intervened, traders sold even more. The market was testing the resolve of the state, and the state was losing. By early September, the pressure was unbearable. On September 15th, Soros gave the order to escalate. His fund increased its short position to $10 billion. It was one of the largest currency bets in history. The next morning, Wednesday, September 16th, the Bank of England tried everything. They raised interest rates from 10% to 12%, hoping to make holding pounds more attractive. It did not work. Hours later, they raised rates again to 15%. Still, the selling continued. Traders around the world sensed blood in the water. The government was panicking, and panic in trading is the surest sign of defeat. By mid-afternoon, Norman Lamont appeared on television. His face was pale. His voice was tight. He announced that Britain was suspending its membership in the ERM. The pound would be allowed to float freely. The peg was broken. The market had won. In the hours that followed, the pound fell more than 15%. Soros and other traders closed their positions, buying back the pounds they had borrowed at a fraction of the price they had sold them for. George Soros personally made over $1 billion in a single day. He became known instantly and forever as the man who broke the Bank of England. But the story does not end with his profit. For Britain, September 16th became known as Black Wednesday. It was a day of national humiliation. The government had spent billions of pounds in reserves trying to defend the currency, all of it wasted. Interest rates had been raised to crushing levels, deepening the recession. And yet, something unexpected happened. In the months that followed, the British economy began to recover. Freed from the constraints of the ERM, the government could lower interest rates. The cheaper pound made British exports more competitive. Growth returned. Unemployment fell. In hindsight, leaving the ERM may have been the best thing that could have happened. But that realization came too late for John Major's government. The political damage was catastrophic. The Conservative Party's reputation for economic competence was shattered. It would take them more than a decade to recover. Soros, for his part, never apologized. He insisted he had done nothing wrong. He had simply recognized a reality that others refused to see. The British government had made a bad decision, and the market corrected it. He was right. But that answer does not capture the full weight of what happened. Because what occurred in September 1992 was not just a trade, it was a revelation. It revealed the limits of government power in a globalized financial system. It showed that even the wealthiest nations cannot defend an indefensible position. It demonstrated that markets, driven by thousands of independent actors, can overpower any central authority. And it exposed the role of belief in trading. The British government believed it could hold the peg. It believed that determination and intervention would be enough. That belief shaped its decisions, its communications, its spending. But belief is not reality. Traders like Soros did not care what the government believed. They cared about facts, interest rates, economic data, political constraints. They looked at the same information and reached a different conclusion. And when belief collides with reality, reality always wins. This dynamic repeats throughout the history of trading. Again and again, governments, institutions, and investors convince themselves of something that cannot last. They see patterns that are not there. They ignore warnings. They double down when they should retreat. The South Sea Bubble of 1720, the Wall Street crash of 1929, the Asian financial crisis of 1997, the collapse of long-term capital management in 1998, the housing bubble of 2008. Each time, the details differ, but the psychology remains the same. Optimism turns into overconfidence, overconfidence turns into fragility, and fragility, once exposed, turns into panic. What makes the story of Black Wednesday especially powerful is how recent it is. This was not some distant historical event. It happened in the modern era, in a developed economy with sophisticated institutions and educated policymakers. And still, the same ancient forces prevailed. Greed, fear, denial, capitulation. These are not relics of the past. They are constants. Today, currency trading is even larger and faster than it was in 1992. Technology has accelerated everything. Algorithms execute trades in milliseconds. Information travels at the speed of light. But the human element remains. Central banks still intervene. Governments still make promises they cannot keep. Traders still search for imbalances, for moments when price and reality diverge. And when they find those moments, they act. The tools change. The scale changes. But the game does not. George Soros understood this intuitively. He did not need complex models or advanced mathematics. He needed clarity, the ability to see through noise, through rhetoric, through wishful thinking. He understood that trading at its core is about recognizing when the world is about to change. Most people cannot do this. They are anchored by what they already believe. They see what they want to see. They trust authority, even when authority is wrong. But a small number of people in every generation develop the ability to think independently, to question consensus, to accept discomfort. Soros was one of them. And on September 16, 1992, his clarity was rewarded. But we should not romanticize him. Soros was not a hero. He was a speculator. His billion-dollar profit came at the expense of British taxpayers, who funded the failed defense of the pound. Ordinary workers suffered through the recession that followed. He did not cause the crisis. The British government did that, but he profited from it massively and unapologetically. This raises uncomfortable questions. Is it moral to bet against a country? To profit from its mistakes? To accelerate a collapse that might have happened anyway? There are no easy answers. Some argue that speculators like Soros perform a necessary function. They expose bad policies. They force governments to confront reality. They act as a check on power. Others see them as vultures, profiting from chaos, indifferent to the human cost. Both views contain truth. What cannot be denied is that the events of Black Wednesday changed the world. They reshaped British politics. They influenced the design of the euro. They altered how central banks think about currency intervention. And they became a defining moment in the history of trading, because they showed, in the starkest possible terms, that no institution is too powerful to fail, that confidence is not the same as strength, that the market, in the end, is not a machine to be controlled, but a force to be respected. This lesson has been learned and forgotten many times. It will be learned and forgotten again, because the temptation to believe in certainty is too strong. Governments will always promise stability. Investors will always seek safety, and both will, at times, confuse their desires with reality. When that happens, the market corrects them, sometimes gently, sometimes violently. On the September 16th, 1992, the correction was violent. The Bank of England, one of the oldest and most respected financial institutions in the world, was humbled by traders it could not control. And George Soros, a Hungarian immigrant who had survived war and rebuilt his life in exile, earned his place in history. Not because he invented something new, but because he understood something old. That in trading, as in life, reality is undefeated, and those who see it clearly will always have an advantage over those who do not. The sun set over London that Wednesday evening, just as it always had. But something fundamental had shifted. The world had been reminded that power, no matter how entrenched, is never permanent. That belief, no matter how widely held, is never unbreakable. And that in the cold, relentless logic of the market, only one thing matters. Not what we wish to be true, but what is.